Hello, 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 and welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle and triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button, follow, like, and share. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. Let's jump right in. Hello, 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 and thank you for joining us. This is the Her Version platform. We have had over 400 women grace this stage up to this point, and our stage is built on storytelling. The understanding that many times one of our greatest learning experiences comes from listening to other people's stories. Today, I'm speaking with an amazing woman named Christine Luken. Christine, the financial dignity coach, yes, and host of the Money is Emotional podcast, is the author of 3 books, including her latest, Financial Dignity After Divorce. Girl, for real. A Woman's Guide to Healing Her Relationship with Money, a leading authority on money and emotion. Christine coaches high-income professionals and divorcing women to pay off staggering amounts of debt and achieve lasting financial dignity. Christine has been interviewed on over 100 podcasts and is regularly featured in Women's World magazine's Ask America's Ultimate Experts. Welcome, lady. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for taking some time out of your day to sit down and chat with us. This is one of the best subjects. I love talking about money because I don't think that it's talked about enough in the world of women.
I
And
agree.
just what a cool subject, what a cool niche. What an honor to be able to have the knowledge and the ability to be able to dig in to a culture, women who struggle in this arena so much. So thank you first for taking some time and being here.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I love talking about money, especially to women. So this is perfect.
I love it. So this podcast is all based on storytelling. We love to hear stories. We do find that quite often people who do own their own businesses or are in some sort of a real slim niche usually comes from something in their past, a pivot that happened, which ended them up in the arena that they're in. So I would love to kind of just open the floor to you for you to be able to kind
Yeah.
of tell us a little bit about you, a journey, a pivot, a challenge that you went through in your life, to be able to kind of get you to where you are now.
Yeah. Well, it is actually a pretty dramatic story. Um, I did not seek to be a financial coach. That was not something that was on my radar. Um, but I was always into numbers and into money. That was something that came easily to me. However, despite being an accountant, I crashed and burned financially at age 26. Um, I had collections. I was pretty much behind on every bill that I had. I had no savings. If it's possible to have a negative credit score, I probably did. No, I don't think that's possible, but I don't know. I mean, if you can have like a 200 credit score,
Close
that's
enough.
probably what I had. I mean, it was bad. And it wasn't because I didn't know what to do with money. I had an accounting degree. I was actually working for a multi-million dollar manufacturing company as the staff accountant. I had worked for banks as I was going through college. The reason I screwed up with my money so badly is because I allowed my heart to hijack my wallet. I had been dating and then became engaged to a guy who had horrible money habits. It was a very unhealthy relationship. Um, I didn't find out until after I left that we call that codependent. I was basically like his mother. I bailed him out of all of his financial messes to my own financial detriment. Thankfully, I did not marry him, thankfully. But when I left, there was a wedding dress in the closet. I lost the deposit on the hall. I actually had to give the engagement ring back to him because his mother had co-signed for it. And in fact, he was so irresponsible with money that I bailed him out of jail for DUI twice, and I actually made one of my own ring payments. Yeah. So I understand that people who are smart can do really dumb things with money, and it can have absolutely nothing to do with how smart you are. And as you can imagine, you know, when people screw up with money, there is this sense of shame usually. We've screwed something up, we feel bad about it. But I think that sense of shame and embarrassment was so much higher for me because I was someone who should have known better, right? You know, I was doing the budget for a multi-million dollar company, and yet I was bouncing my own checks at home. And so reaching out to get help from my family, like that was super hard for me. And I probably waited much longer than I should have, and actually stayed in that relationship longer than I should have because I didn't have any money to leave. When I was ready to leave that toxic relationship, um, I was in the hole. I had no savings. You know, I couldn't get another apartment because my credit score was so bad. I had to fix some things before I could even hit reset. Like I wasn't like leaving and starting at zero. I was leaving and starting in the hole.
Mm.
And there was definitely a big emotional weight to that. Um, and so, I have definitely a very soft spot in my heart for women who are going through divorce. Obviously that wasn't a divorce for me because I didn't get married, but I call it my almost divorce because we were living together, we had pets together, we had, our finances were entangled, his name was on some of my credit cards. Like it was, besides not going to court, it felt like a divorce for me. And so I understand how women especially can feel coming out of those situations, whether, sometimes they come out of it not even, like me, where they were the responsible one. And then sometimes they come out of it where their husband was responsible for everything. And once the divorce goes through, they're like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing here. Right. And I always say that money is like sex. No one talks about it. We're expected to be good at it, and yet no one formally teaches us about it. And then when we're not good, we feel embarrassed and ashamed.
Wow. Yeah.
It's the truth, right?
Yeah.
It's the truth. And my road to financial recovery and emotional recovery, it was, honestly, I would say the financial recovery was actually a little bit easier than the emotional recovery because once I no longer had a grown man child who was sponging off of me, my finances improved pretty quickly. It did take me probably a good 2 to 2.5 years to be completely debt free. But, you know, because my dad had sat down with me and he said, look, let me help you create a plan. And, he just gave me one or two things to do at a time, which was exactly what I needed because I was just so overwhelmed and there were so many messes that I had to clean up that he just helped me prioritize and just said, hey, let's just focus on this one thing at a time. And then once we've got that taken care of, then we'll move on to this one. Um, and, there was that emotional recovery as well. And it was very interesting because very early on, as my finances got better, um, it was probably about a year after I left my ex-fiance. I remember driving to work and the thought struck me that I wasn't worried about money. And that was a shock because every day for the 7 years previous, I worried about money. Yeah, sometimes it was like super high anxiety, sometimes it was low level anxiety, but it's like it never went away. And it was like I had no idea until I was on the other side of it, And I wasn't even debt free at that point, but I was on the path and I was making progress. And that's when I decided I wanted to help people with this because I thought there's other people who are just like me a year
Yeah.
ago that are feeling these same feelings and they don't even realize that there's another way to do this. And as I started, I volunteered with my church. They were teaching a personal finance course. And, that's kind of how I got my start into helping people. Um, but I quickly realized that there was a big component that was missing. No one was addressing the emotional side of money. So this was back
Mhm.
in like two, 2002, 2003 when I started helping people, just informally as a volunteer. There was nobody that was teaching this stuff. It was like financial psychology was in its infancy. And
Mhm.
so as I started coming across different things, I was just like absorbing it like a sponge. But I also realized that those things that were coming out on like the mindset and the psychology of money, there was this disconnect. So it was like you had like the practical application with the checklist over here, and then you had the psychology and the mindset over here, but like nobody was putting these two things together.
Mhm.
Um, and, you know, as I continued to help people, I had a great job. I was making six figures working in accounting. But I think those of us who are entrepreneurs, we come to this point to where like no amount of money can keep us working for someone where there's no passion, where the passion is gone. And we have to take that chance and strike out on our own. So that's what I did. And from the beginning of my business, it was very important for me to teach people how to harness the power of their emotions rather than fight against them because the consensus out there with the personal finance gurus was, you know, just, if you feel like spending emotionally, just like buck up and use some discipline and don't do it. And that's not really helpful advice,
Yeah.
in my opinion. So that's really what led me down this road to helping people with their emotions and using that as a tool rather than an excuse for why they can't do better with money.
Absolutely. One of the things that I love that you said is, why did this happen? Because you're smart. And I think that's
Yeah.
one of the biggest issues that I know that I've had looking back. I think to myself, what the heck? Like, I consider myself a fairly smart person. How could something like this have happened? And I do. I think that it's so important to recognize that, you don't always know all the things.
Mhm.
Why it's so important to, to read, to link up with someone like you who has the knowledge in these areas of which we know very little about in order to make sure
Right.
that we're expanding our mindset in these areas. I want to ask, when you're talking about money linked to emotion, what does that mean?
So it's interesting because science has proven that the moment of decision occurs in the same part of our brain that processes emotion. So literally every single decision that we make is emotional at some level. And I was always annoyed with, financial planners or CPAs who would say things like, just leave emotion out of this financial decision and just like do the logical thing that I'm telling you to do. And then they get frustrated with their clients when they go and do the thing. So,
Mhm.
you know, money is all tied up into our lives, right? It's entangled with our family situation, with our hobbies, with, you know, our friends. It's like you can't even go a day, barely a day, without interacting with your money in some way, right? It's like you're spending money, you're saving money, you're managing your money, you're earning money, and yet we're not like talking about it. And so, you know, I recently recorded a podcast about how to stop spending emotionally, and the short answer was you can't. We can't stop spending emotionally because we are emotional creatures, and there is such a thing as unhealthy emotional spending, and there's a thing as that is healthy emotional spending, right? So
Mhm.
when we are in an emotional state where we're peaceful and we're positive and we're mindful, and we make a spending decision or an investing decision, more than likely it's going to be a good one, right? But if we are making financial decisions out of fear, out of FOMO, um, because we're bored, because we're lonely, chances are those aren't going to be positive outcomes. So when we try to use money and spending to fill an emotional need, it's like emotional eating, right? Like we have to eat, our bodies need food. Are we choosing that food because of nutritional value? Or like, well, we get this totally with the food because we're like, oh, yeah, I mean, if I'm bored or I'm anxious, I'm going to eat something sweet because
Mhm.
it makes me feel good. So just even getting people to understand that there are emotions behind a lot of our financial decisions
Yeah.
that we're not even aware of, that helps us to shift into more of a mindful interaction with our money.
Definitely makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, so when you say it's always emotional, is that true? Is there a way that we can spend logically versus emotional? Is that possible, or is it always, like you said, emotional?
Well, here's the way I like to explain it.
Can I add
So,
something to that?
yes.
Add something to that? So the reason I'm asking is for myself. So I
Okay.
consider myself to spend logically.
Mhm.
I think the reason I'm asking is, do I think I'm spending logically, or am I actually spending emotionally?
Well, if you if you feel like you are doing good logical things with your money, at some level that makes you feel good and it makes you feel proud of your behavior and that feels good to you. Um, we are both logical and emotional creatures. And the best financial decisions are the ones where we consult both our logic and our emotions. So, this is the way I like to explain it. If we want to think about the voice of reason, is our logic. And the voice of reason, we can almost think of this like two different radio stations playing or two different podcasts playing. The voice of reason is always there. It's very quiet and calm and steady. Now, the voice of emotion, unlike the voice of reason's like this, the voice of emotion is like this, right? So sometimes it's really loud, sometimes it's really soft, sometimes it's really happy, sometimes it's kind of sad, but both of them are always there. What I tell people is we want to make important financial decisions when the volume on our emotion is low. So, if you can recognize that your emotions are loud, and that could be positive, like it, you can get really excited about buying a car, right? That's still a loud emotion, right? It's very intense. But if you're also feeling super anxious about something, or you're feeling sad or you're feeling bored, and those feelings are loud, then that's when we need to take a step back and say, okay, I need to let these feelings subside before I make this decision. Now, I'm not talking about buying a $5 coffee. I'm talking about these big major decisions like, buying a car or putting $300 worth of clothes in your Amazon shopping cart, right? So, you know, and I tell people
Mm.
it's okay to buy things that make you happy, right? This is one of the reasons why we create a plan for our finances. And part of that plan includes fun. So I am not a proponent of strict budgets with zero wiggle room. I find that most people, unless you're in dire financial straits, we've got room for the things that make us happy. And I call those
Mhm.
pleasure purchases, right? So
Mhm.
rather than saying, "Oh, this is like emotional spending," which usually has a negative connotation, to me, when I'm spending on something fun that I enjoy, I like to refer to that as a pleasure purchase. Like, this is money that I have set aside. It's not for anything else other than to make me happy. And so then there's zero guilt with that. So sometimes people have money and they do have room to spend on discretionary things because they're already doing the investing, they've already got, all the bills taken care of, and yet they still feel guilty spending money on themselves. Like, that's just as bad as someone who never feels guilty about running the credit cards up. So
Yeah.
we've got these wild extremes of emotion.
Mhm.
um, but we can actually use our brains in our favor. And so you said, I'd like to think that I spend logically. We can use habit in our favor. So if we set up some things that become good habits, then they almost become unconscious and are kind of running in the background. And it's very rare that our emotions throw those off. So I'll give you an example. Um, I have automatic transfers set up to go into my savings. It's on autopilot, and I don't think about it. Like, even when I see the notification from my bank that says, "Hey, we put X amount from your checking into your savings," I rarely get an emotional zing over that, either positive or negative. So there are ways that we can, sort of little tricks and hacks where we can kind of pull the emotion down so that we can make better decisions. But we don't want to turn the emotion off or stuff it completely, because you've probably had this experience where you've had some sort of financial decision to make, and you're like, this seems to be the best choice logically, but then you have this feeling, right? Like, this gut feeling like, well, maybe there's just something not right. Like, I don't know what it is, I can't explain it. And then you ignore it, and then you find out later, right? That, oh God, that really wasn't a great decision. Like, I ended up buying this car that seemed to be like the better deal. And I had this feeling that maybe I should buy the more expensive one, but I'm trying to do the smart thing. And then I buy this car, and 6 months later, the engine blows up.
Got it.
So sometimes it's really not about shutting off the feelings completely, because our feelings can serve us as long as they are under our control.
Yes, totally makes sense. When you were talking about having high emotions towards things, it kind of reminded me of when they say to eat before you go to the grocery store. Like, don't go to the
Yeah.
grocery store hungry.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and if there are certain times or certain situations that cause you to misbehave financially, there are some strategies that we can entail. And so I'll give you an example. There was there was a financial planner that I was chatting with, and he had this client that had gone through divorce, and she had this real problem with emotional spending, and he was trying to, help get her on a budget, and cuz she wasn't investing in her retirement. And it was like they finally got to the bottom of where she was overspending, and it was shoes. Like, she had more shoes than she could ever wear.
Wow.
And they figured out what the target was. So, or what her trigger was. When she would drop her son off at her ex's house, it had been a very toxic marriage, but she still had to deal with them because they were co-parenting together. So when she would drop her son off or pick her son up, when there would be some heated emotional exchange between her and her ex, she would go shoe shopping because that made her feel better. And so what I suggested was that she put her workout clothes in the back of her car whenever she was going to, you know, to have any kind of interaction with her ex. And if she was tempted to shoe shop, she should go to the gym instead, because she did need an emotional outlet for that anger and that frustration. And I think it's really sad that we are not taught emotional management.
Yep.
Like, we are not taught what is a healthy way for us to process these emotions. Instead, we stuff them, or we use unhealthy coping mechanisms, whether it's, alcohol, drugs, or shopping, right? So, it's not about shutting those feelings down completely. It's really about increasing our emotional intelligence around our money.
Yeah. Speaking of increasing, how does somebody increase their net worth without having to make more money? So you are where you are.
Hmm.
How does
Yeah.
someone increase their net worth?
Well, it's really simple. Net worth is essentially what you own minus what you owe. That's your net worth. And so there are only a few small things that affect that. One is your income, right? So yes, we could make more money. The other thing is your spending. And some of that spending may be your liabilities, which is your debt. So the best way for people to increase their net worth is really to do an audit of where your money is going. I highly recommend using a personal finance app. I like Mint because it's free and it's relatively easy to use. That's what I use with all my clients currently. And what I find is that when people are spending money over multiple methods, it's very hard to keep track of exactly what they're spending on certain things. So, if you're spending on a debit card and out of your checking account, but then you also have three or four or five different credit cards, having a personal finance app where you link all of those and it pulls everything all into one place, it will let you see what you're spending on certain categories. So, it might not seem like you're spending a lot of money on eating out because you're kind of spreading those charges around different payment methods. But once you see it pulled all into one place and you're like, oh my God, I'm
Wow.
spending $1,000 on eating
Yep.
out.
Yep.
Like, that's more than I really want to be spending. And I'm of the opinion where I typically tell my clients I don't want them to cut out something completely, especially if it's something that they like and that's important to them. But many times we can look at several different categories and say, well, you know what? Maybe I'm just going to try to cut my eating out by 30% next month, and we'll see how that goes. Just being more mindful of it. And that's the other thing that personal finance apps are great for, is that you can see in real time what you're spending during the month. So
Mm.
you can pull it up before before you even go into the restaurant, and you can say, all right, I spent $1,000 last month. My challenge is to only spend $700 this month. And then it's like, all right, it's the 20th and I have $200 left. Do I want to spend some of it today? Right. Um, but if you can find several different areas where it's like, okay, I can cut a couple $100 here. I'm not using some of these streaming subscriptions. I'm going to cut those out. Um, and then we can redirect that money into more productive things, right? So we can direct that money to get some of our debt paid off. Some of my clients are in complete shock when we start using the personal finance app together, because they've never seen what they're spending on finance charges per month until it's all pulled in there and the finance app says, hey, guess what? You spent $350 on finance charges this month. And people are like, oh my God. So
Yeah.
really just like creating that awareness and that mindfulness, just seeing that can help you shift your behavior. I use a lot of food analogies because I think there's so many parallels there. It's like if you've ever done an eating plan where you have to count your calories,
Mhm.
you like look at a package and you're like, oh my God, holy crap, like 300 like I don't want to spend 300 calories on this. Like I don't want to write that down. I don't want to write down that I ate 6 Oreos. So I'm only going to eat 2. But just that counting and tracking is extremely beneficial. And so, increasing net worth, yes, of course, increasing income can help, but that's usually not where I start. I usually start with let's looking at where let's look at where the spending's going, making sure that lines up with what's important to us, and let's start looking at those finance charges, because some of those can be really easy to start decreasing if we can do some refinancing. If we've got some savings that we can pay that off with and immediately free up some of that money, that starts to build that net worth. And then we can start setting up those automatic transfers to saving and investments and those sorts of things.
Awesome. Um, Speaking of emotions in and around money, what are some limiting beliefs that either you've had or that you notice often around money that's keeping them from really um, being able to kind of control it better?
Yeah. I think there's a few. I think one of the ones that I personally ran up against, and it wasn't so much personally, it was more in my business, of that you have to work really hard to make money. And it was almost like I was addicted to the struggle and thinking that I had to exchange time for money. Like if I did not work really hard, then I did not deserve to be paid this much. Not what the result was, right? If someone says like, "Okay, if I can come in here and I can spend 2 hours with you and I can find, you know, $1,000 worth of expenses that we can trim, you know, that's over a year that's worth $12,000 to somebody, right?"
Yeah,
But I would say, well, I only spent 2 hours, so I should only get X for that,
got
right?
it.
So I ran up against that myself. And also I think what it the other thing that it I should say did not do for me was it was like I was blinded from opportunities that were relatively easy where I could make money. So things like affiliate relationships. It was like it was like I had the blinders on, where it was like I didn't even see that I could make money that way. because I felt like I had this deep down feeling that it had to be hard. The other thing that I see with a lot of people is this conditioning that rich people are evil and greedy, and that, you know, money corrupts good character, and money changes people. And so we can say all we want that we want to make more money, but if deep down inside we feel like there's something wrong or dirty about being wealthy, there's something in our subconscious mind that wants us to agree with ourselves deep down at our core. And so it's we will self-sabotage because deep down inside we don't want to be a bad person.
Yeah.
And it's only until we can uncover that and say, "Oh, here's what this is,"
Yeah.
and examine it and say, "Is this really true?" Right? Are there rich people who are good and who are doing positive things in the world? Unfortunately, what makes the headlines in the news is the rich people who are doing criminal things to people, not the ones who, are giving millions of dollars to charity. Those are not usually the ones that we see on the news. So sometimes we just need to listen to what we're saying about money. And that can kind of give us a clue as to what might some of those limiting beliefs be.
Absolutely. Um, when it comes to divorce and females, what would be some advice that you would give to a woman who is walking towards a divorce? What's
Mhm.
maybe a couple of things that she should really keep in mind regarding finances?
Yeah. The first and most important thing is to start taking an inventory of your finances right now. If you've been relatively unengaged, it's important that you start looking through and understanding, what does it take to run your household? What sort of money is in the accounts, etc. I actually have a checklist, which I guess we can link this up later. I call it the Divorcing Woman's Money Checklist. And it has this checklist of all the things, the documents that you need to gather so you can get your arms around what do my current financial situation look like. Um, the other thing that I tell women is that, money is the third person in your marriage. You may walk away from your spouse, but you and money are together forever. And so if you have been relatively uninvolved with the finances, it can make you feel like you are suddenly in a room with a stranger because your husband was the one that had the relationship with money and you didn't really
Mhm.
deal with money directly. It was only through him. Now all of a sudden, you and money are sitting on the couch together, feeling awkward, and you're like, well, so what do you want to do? So, we do have a relationship with money, and we need to start spending time with our money. And it is okay to reach out and get help with this. So that's typically not going to be your divorce attorney. However, if you and your spouse had a financial planner, it could potentially be that person or another person in that firm if you don't want to continue working with that same person. Or it could be a financial coach or a CPA that can help you get reacquainted with money.
That is great. And a great visual. Totally makes
Yes.
sense.
Yes.
Totally makes
So,
sense. And that is a thing, so what do you wanna do?
yeah.
Because yeah, and we're constantly bombarded with this feeling. Some of us are constantly bombarded with this feeling of, if you have money, you're supposed to spend the money.
Mhm.
So you
Yeah.
feel like you have to do something with it, when in actuality, there's no rush to do anything. There's
Right.
all, you can literally hold on to the money. You can invest the money. You can just chill with the money. You don't
Right.
have to get rid of it, spend it.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a lot of times there's an overwhelm where it's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know, is it okay for me to spend this much money? Like, I don't want to run out of money. That's something I hear from women a lot, is this fear of running out of money. And so, you know, until you make a plan and you see, okay, here's what's coming in, here's what my monthly expenses are, here's what's left over, and start directing those things to say, okay, this is going towards paying off debt, this is going towards retirement, this is for my emergency savings. Like, when you have that plan, it drastically reduces that anxiety, because you're basically telling your money where to go. You're saying, like, okay, here's how we're going to operate. I call it a prosperity plan because I think that sounds way better than a budget.
Definitely. That's great. Well, listen, this has been phenomenal. I so appreciate you being here hanging out with us. For those of you that are hanging out on the live, thank you so much for being here. For those of you watching on the replay, if you could hashtag replay wherever you're watching us at so that we can send you some love on whatever platform you are at. If you are watching us live, if you could do us a favor and share this video wherever that you are at so we can get more eyes and more ears on the content. And Christine and this awesome little bits of nuggets that she's given us here and there. I do want to ask though, Christine, so for those that are watching live, for those that are watching on the replay and they've made it this far, they're obviously interested, they're resonating with what you're saying. Who's your clientele? Who should be contacting you? And where should they go? Where should they find you?
Yeah, so the vast majority of my one-on-one coaching clients are either professional couples who are making multiple six figures, or women who are exiting such a marriage. Sometimes they are not the primary breadwinner, but they are, getting a substantial settlement or support. And it's not that the income isn't there, it's how do I manage this? Because even though we have this high income, we're really not where we want to be financially. And they can reach me on my website, christineluken.com. And I'm very active on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And also, they can find my podcast, the Money is Emotional podcast, on all the major platforms.
Beautiful. What social media do you hang out on the most?
Facebook, my personal Facebook, and LinkedIn.
Beautiful. Under your name?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And why do you do what you do?
I do what I do because I want to spread the financial dignity movement. And so, what that means to me is shining my light into the financial darkness of others and giving them hope.
We need that.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I so appreciate you and all the goodness that you shared today. Thank you for taking some time out of your day. For those of you that are watching either live or on the replay, if you resonated with Christine and all the goodness that she shared, make sure you contact her, find her. She predominantly hangs out on Facebook, and her website is above her head area, christineluken.com. And then it's also in the description below and a clickable link if you want to go ahead and click on that. We love to connect people here on this platform in order to make sure that we all continue to rise. So listen, thanks for joining us today on this episode of Her Version. This community is expanding every single day and is filled with females who are striving to do better than they did yesterday. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you have a story to share, check us out at hernation.life. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria, and I'm so grateful to be here sharing a platform that allows people to share their truth and inspire others.